Welcome to the JDRC Politics Podcast
with your hosts Ryan Clark and Jay Doherty.
We have some breaking news, and for the podcast, of course, I'm joined by my co-host Ryan Clark. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic.
We do have a lot of news that we really need to get to today. We're going to begin with the podcast of the extreme terror attack in Barcelona. Ryan, why don't you kick it off for us today?
Yeah, so we obviously have breaking news from Barcelona. A few hours ago, a van plowed into a crowd of tourists in Barcelona in an area called Las Ramblas. Las Ramblas is an area, a tourist destination within Barcelona. A lot of people go there. And as a result of that, with a rising death count, currently it's at 13. 100 people were affected. They were injured in varying amounts by the van. And in addition to the already dead, there are 15 individuals in critical condition, and we are waiting for news on them.
Yeah, we're urgently waiting for news literally right out of the hospital. We're trying to figure out exactly what their situation is and how it might improve or, get worse as time goes on. I also want to talk about the arrest, the terrorist side of this. It was a very sad attack. As you mentioned, 13 people were killed, but the Catalan president said that 2 suspects have been arrested. Now, one suspect was reported to be Moroccan, while the other one was from the Spanish Enclave.
Shortly after the incident, police swarmed the area. There were reports of shots being fired by some eyewitnesses. Meanwhile, ISIS has said that the attackers, whoever plowed into those people, was a soldier of the Islamic State, but it has not directly said that. Is not directly claimed responsibility. So, Jay, I think, is there anything else that might shed some light on what's happening?
So there was actually an explosion in Catalonia, which analysts think that it may be connected to the incident. In Barcelona, all the trains and public events have been canceled, so there's not going to be any sporting events or entertainment, it seems, for some near future. Let's talk about how the United States is responding to this. Donald Trump, the White House, the dissolution of his councils. Ryan, I know you know a lot about how the United States is responding.
Yeah, so Donald Trump's response to this attack was very swift, just like NATO, and they all condemned the attack. Donald Trump's direct condemning of ISIS or the involved radical Islamic terrorists possibly involved in this was very swift, and that's in sharp contrast to what happened in Charlottesville when it took days for him to directly condemn whoever may be involved. And so for this reason, we're seeing many prominent business leaders joining or leaving his councils. Do you have more info on that?
Yeah, so I actually have a strong opinion on this that I was really looking forward to share on the podcast about this, because this is very sad. The fact that Donald Trump takes so long, he hasn't even done it yet, to condemn a terrorist attack on his own country's soil. He hasn't done that yet, but yet he can claim responsibility for an attack that happened in another country within hours of it actually happening. So, Ryan, as you said, there's high contrast into what he condemned, how soon he condemned Barcelona and how soon he condemned the actual KKK and white supremacist, white nationalist marches and violence. There's a lot of contrast there, very deeply saddening contrast. It's really unfortunate. Let's talk about we really want to talk about the manufacturing, and there's a lot of business leaders that were announcing their resignations just because of the White House's American Manufacturing Council and how they're handling that. In recent days, Donald Trump actually announced that he was ending the panel Wednesday along with his separate and strategic and policy forum.
Yeah, so a lot of, as time has passed, CEOs and business leaders of American companies and industries have been resigning from this council. After Ken Frazier resigned from Merck Pharma, who its number one customer for pharmaceuticals is the U.S., and he resigned from the Manufacturing Council, Donald Trump swiftly tweeted on Twitter, now that Ken Frazier of Merck Pharma has resigned from President's Manufacturing Council, he will have more time to lower rip-off drug prices. There were reports by the New York Times that there may have been some sort of a conference call going on between these business leaders at some point, and they all kind of resigned within the same few hours. But Donald Trump kind of dissolved this council as they were resigning, kind of an effort to maybe cloak this a little bit more. I don't know, but it's clear that his attempts at this council failed. I think these business leaders, there are a lot of reasons, but I think, they fear losing business, and it's become very political, and especially after Charlottesville, I think they felt they had to resign. And I think the failure of this council represents kind of some of the broader failures of Donald Trump. He wanted to be the business president, the CEO president.
Right.
The American people wanted this. This was a lot of his persona. And he can't work with these other people. And because it's gone too political, one of the concepts failed, that business leaders could work with politicians in such a public way. I think these people will still be lobbying, and they'll still work with Washington, probably much more privately.
Right, that was kind of like the big things that he run on during the campaign, saying that, he is a businessman, not a politician. That was like the biggest thing that everyone was so into. And now, he's ending these councils in kind of like a sarcastic way, as I said, but that doesn't really matter.
But they are ended.
Let's talk about the 8 members that quit. So let's start with Ken Frazier. He's actually the CEO of Merck. As you said, he quit early Monday morning. And then the Strategic and Policy Forum, which was led by Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman, he quit as well. And they had big players in finance, which included, J.P. Morgan, the CEO Jamie Dimon, he quit. The PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi, he quit. General Motors CEO Mary Barra quit. And actually, the biggest one, I would say, for America manufacturing and consumption was Walmart. The CEO Doug McMillon quit.
And he's very well liked on that council,
right.
And that was a big a major change.
Yeah, and they kind of, had no choice in a way to quit. And, the president was, in the press conference, he's obviously asked by this because this is such a major change. So, obviously people have to have closing remarks or closing memos. Actually, the Strategic and Policy Forum, who's led, as I said, by the CEO of Blackstone, Stephen Schwarzman, he said, quote, "We believe the debate over foreign participation has become a distraction from our well-intentioned and sincere desire to aid vital policy discussions on how to improve the lives of everyday Americans. As such, the president and we are disbanding the forum." That was kind of like the way that the group said they quit and they're done. Shoutouts go to Adam listening in Chicago, Joseph listening in Vermont, PJ listening in Sacramento, California, Anna listening in Maine, and Jonathan listening in Georgia. Thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. All right, that's going to wrap it up for today's podcast. Ryan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come to work today and, do the podcast, record it with me, and broadcast it live on the JDRC.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. We want to thank all of our listeners for subscribing and just listening to the podcast overall. If you have not subscribed yet and you like the podcast, do consider subscribing. It is free, of course. And also like the video if you want to see more of this. And check back next week for a new podcast. Thanks so much, and bye.